Welcome to the Growing in Grace podcast, where you can listen in on some casual conversation about the good news of Jesus without all of the inconsistent religious double talk. If you've ever struggled with feelings of hopelessness, guilt, and despair, or wondered if you're really right with God, it's time to discover the true freedom that comes with the gospel of unlimited and overflowing grace.
Well, Cap, here we are. Did you ever think that we would make it to this point? It's the Growing in Grace podcast. I'm Joel Brzezinski, along with Mike Kapler, and if you are not in the know, this is quite two milestones for us today, Cap. We got the 20th anniversary of the Growing in Grace podcast, and also this is episode 1000. Do you ever think we would get here? Do you ever think it would come to this? Was this part of our 20-year plan when we started?
Well, I was just going to say, it might impress some of our listeners out there to know that 20 years ago, we planned it so the 1000th episode would land on the 20th anniversary. That's not true.
No, I was just joking with somebody on YouTube. She commented, and I said, didn't you know that this was our 20-year plan? You know, we planned this. It was, it went exactly how we thought it would go 20 years ago. But of course, the wonderful thing about this is that we had no clue, really, in reality, 20 years ago, no clue what would come of this. Would it be, what do we do if you? And it wasn't even a podcast. We were invited or asked by a new friend at the time, Dave Lesniak, if we wanted to take part in doing like an online radio program. And he asked me, and I did not want to do it by myself if I was going to do it. And so I talked to you, and you agreed to do this thing with me. And so would it last, would we be doing this for a few weeks? Would it be a year? Who knew? And the word podcasting, never had heard that word. I still, honestly, to this day, I still don't even think of us as podcasters, even though technically it's a podcast. We do a podcast, but I just think of us all along. It's been you and me just talking about God's grace and His love and the gospel and putting it up on the internet. And yes, that's a podcast, but it's I've never been one to think of myself as, when people say, "Oh, that person's a podcaster," I don't put myself into that category for whatever reason, but. It's just fun.
Maybe it's because we had a legalist out there who referred to us as podcasters in his book.
Yeah, that's true. That could be.
Has left a bad taste in your mouth. But you're right, Joel. I'm just the sidekick here in this podcast gig because Joel was doing online blogging and stuff back in the early 2000s, excited about the message of grace. And got invited, as you said, by Dave to do this new internet radio thing. I came along for the ride. So I'm just the sidekick. Now, when it comes to spiritual knowledge, Joel is the sidekick. But that's another story.
I knew you were leading somewhere on that, of course. Yes, you boaster in the flesh.
That was my 20-second plan right there.
The 20-second plan, yeah. Plan W.
So something changed big time for me in the year was 1994, so it's been over 30 years now at the time of this broadcast. I had a zeal for God. I know you did too, Joel. We were Christians. I had been somebody who had come to Christ at a young age as a child, and so I was in my early 30s when the grace anvil dropped on me. You ever Roadrunner, Looney Tunes? Anyway, it hit me like a ton of bricks very quickly. God was prepping me for it. I was at a place of uneasiness about the Christian faith, about a lot of traditions, a lot of things that in the different church circles that I had been in, I just wasn't comfortable that everything was adding up. And I didn't really know what it was about. I didn't have a list of specific things, but there were just certain things flowing through me that caused me to realize inwardly that something just wasn't right. Mm-hmm. It wasn't making sense, some of what we held so near and dear to our hearts as evangelical, Bible-believing, born-again Christians. It just wasn't adding up for me. And so 1994 hit. Don't want to get into all that right now, but that also coincidentally was the same year that you and I met.
Yep.
Some months later, it was the month of March when I hit that Grace air balloon that lifted me out of the muck and mire and rescued me from a lot of religious gunk. And then later that year, you and I met.
Yeah, we met in July. Yep.
Yeah, around the summertime. And you being the introvert that you are, you didn't see yourself doing radio broadcasting, but I convinced you to come on. I'd help train you and get you so you could do what was necessary to get on the air. And so you were stepping out of your comfort zone. And then I started sharing grace with you because you could not shut me up. As little as I knew about it back then, I knew that I couldn't hold this in.
Yeah.
And so it just worked out to where you and I would start talking, and I would start sharing some things and stuff I was learning, and you were catching on to it. And so it was a little over 10 years after that we started doing the podcast. Now, I want to share a story here, Joel, that I've never shared with anyone, and so it's totally unrehearsed here. I haven't shared it with you. And I hope it's an encouragement to some people out there, because you and I never would have met if it weren't. And of course, a lot of different things had to happen for things to play out the way they did. There's a whole bunch of circumstances and different people that would have been involved. But I just want to give an example of one. And God brought this to my remembrance here recently. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's for this purpose to share it on our podcast. But long before 1994, long before my grace days, probably a decade before that, at least, maybe even sooner than that, earlier than that, I had a friend that I worked with in retail. She was a few years younger than me, but we had this connection with Christianity. She went to an evangelical church, and so did I. And so I got to know her family and went over to their house a few times and would talk with her and her sister and her mom and whoever was there, maybe her dad. And we just kind of talk about things, because it turns out that the mom was interested in getting into some teachings. We read some of the same books by the same authors that weren't necessarily talked about within either of our churches. And so, without getting into that, so we have this fellowship going on where we just sit around and talk about it, sort of feeling like we were on the outside looking in when it came to certain things about God that we would like to know more about. And then she just commonly mentioned, I'd like to go visit so-and-so's church. And something went boing within me, and I thought, I wonder who that is. It turns out it's a young pastor who just started a church in the area and was teaching some of the things that we like to talk about. Again, long before grace. Mm-hmm. And it resonated with me. Something rang from within, and I ended up going to that church. And Joel, the first thing I ran into when I walked into the building on my first visit there, they had a diagram up. Now, this is a new church. They were renting out space in a building, and it wasn't big, but they had this diagram up that talked about their future ministries, where they hope to build a building, and it would be the future radio ministry location as well. They wanted to start a Christian radio station. Mm. Well, I had gone to radio school before this, and I went for a short period of time, and then I quit because I wasn't sure I wanted to spend that much money. Right. And I didn't know if radio was going to work for me or not. So I left that, but I'd always wanted to do radio since I was 14 years old. And so that resonated with me, because I always thought it would be cool to get on the radio, and I didn't care what music was being played. It'd just be cool to get on there and talk about God. But I got there, and I say all that, and the rest is history. That church did start a radio station. I got involved with it from the beginning, and then, different circumstances happened in that decade. The station restarted in the 90s, and that's where you and I met. If that woman, that friend of mine, had not said that, if she had not said that about, I'd like to go visit so-and-so's church, you and I wouldn't be speaking to each other right now. Now, there's a whole bunch of other things that would have been involved in God orchestrating all of this to make it all come together to bring us to the place where we are now. But I just use her as an example, as one domino in a long line of dominoes. But if that domino had not been in place at that particular time, at that particular moment, if God had not used her in that way, without her even realizing it remotely, that God was using her to bring this to fruition, for example, if that had not happened, that would have been a missing domino. And I just don't think that this would have occurred. But, so I say all that to encourage our listeners out there that you just never know, literally may never know how God is using you.
That's amazing. That is, yeah, you've never shared that with me. I've never heard that. And that is fascinating how that happened. That one little incident, and like you say, probably other things too added into it, but it was just how it wasn't part of your plan. You hadn't been thinking that that's what you would do. It just happened that that she said that. You ended up going to that church where they were going to be starting this radio station, and that wouldn't have happened for you if not for that thing. And I want to go along with that encouragement for people. Because again, our two voices here, Mike Kapler and Joel Brieseke, we would not be speaking together right now doing this thing if not for that, and also a very interesting line of events that happened in my life that also were not what I would have planned or envisioned for my life at all. You wanted to get into radio. The interesting thing for me is that was the farthest thing from my mind. The furthest thing in 1993, so the year before that, I had written out a list of things that I might, how could God use me to minister to other people, things that I might want to do with my life, and it was all introverted stuff. And the closest thing would have been behind a camera at a radio station, so the spotlight wouldn't be on me, or doing behind-the-scenes work in a radio station, but not in front of a mic. I would not have ever pictured myself doing that, anything like that. And so anyway, real briefly, my story was that the guy who was my best man, he ended up being the best man in my wedding in 1996. Well, a few years before that, in 1994, so we're looking at 1994 again, he had gone to a ministry school, a youth ministry school, I think it was, down in Kansas City. And I would go down every once in a while as a single guy and visit him. This is my wife and I had dated on and off, before we got married. And so there was one time when we weren't dating. So if we would have been dating at this time, I wouldn't have, I would have just stayed up there. I wouldn't have gone down there to see a group of friends that were down there. And we got to talking. I was talking with there were two girls who were going to this school and a guy who was actually from Florida. And we were in a car on our way to a Royals game. We were going to go see a baseball game. And they were talking about how interesting, how wonderful it would be if they could start some sort of a youth-oriented radio station, Christian radio station in Kansas City, because at the time there wasn't anything like that. I said, well, I don't know how to do that, but there's this radio station where I'm from in Waterloo. I could go talk to them and just see if I can get any information about how to start a radio station. And so long story short, from that conversation, I ended up coming back home. I went up and visited the radio station. I talked to Michael, not you, but the other Mike at the radio station. And the funny thing is, he never ended up giving me any information about how to go about this. In fact, he kind of laughed because he knew how, it's not just straightforward. It's a very difficult process to get something like that started. But he did say to me, but we are looking for a couple of volunteer DJs. And in my introverted mind and life, I was like, nope, that's not me. I'm not going to do that. And I left, and it just for days, that would not leave me. I say, no, that's not me. But that idea would not leave me. So I ended up, though, coming up and talking to you. So the next time I went up, I talked with you. I was actually going to go up there with another friend. I did go up there with another friend, and he ended up not doing it. But then, yes, through talking with you, we set up a plan to get me started in training. I think you had like a week vacation coming up, so you went off on your vacation. And then when you came back, it was August 1st, I remember this, of 1994. For 2 hours, I trained. I had no experience, nothing, never been in front of a microphone, anything like that. It was an AM station playing Christian hit music, went off the air, so then we would train for 2 hours. Tuesday night, the 2nd of August, came in, trained for 2 hours. Wednesday night, trained for 2 hours. You said to me, do you want to do the same thing tomorrow? I said, sure. And then you said, well, what I was thinking is I would put you on the air tomorrow. So I'm like, this fresh out of the water, introverted guy, 6 hours of training, and you ended up...
I'm pretty sure you wet your pants.
Probably. I
won't
wouldn't
say how
doubt
I
it.
knew.
But I cringe when I go back and listen. I have some tapes from my training and also from my first few years on the air, and I cringe listening to those. But all of that to say, kind of getting back to what you were talking about, and the thing about my friend going down to Kansas City to that school, before he went to that school, he was short like $300, and back then that was a lot of money for us, for any of us. And somebody out of the blue that he didn't know gave him the money that he needed to go to this school. So if that wouldn't have happened, he never would have gone to that school. I never would have gone down there to visit the friends that I had met down there through him. I never would have come up to the radio station, blah, 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 all that. So this whole line of things that, you and I never would have planned. It wasn't in us to plan these things, and God just orchestrated it all. And here we are today, 30 years after all of that, and again, like we've been talking about, 20 years after having started recording ourselves together, having conversations about the grace of God. So you never know what God's going to do. So never count yourself out. Just know that God is always doing some stuff, even if you can't see it.
We've heard from so many people over the years who have written to us and expressed their appreciation for what we share, how we share it, different things. Now, we've probably had a lot of listeners come and go. Some of those who were so dedicated in the first several hundred episodes, maybe they're not listening anymore, but there's always new ones, which I know you want to talk about here in a minute, Joel. But, it's exciting for us because realize this started so organically, as we mentioned, that there was no plan. There was no marketing scheme. We didn't ask for donations. We didn't try to bring in sponsors. We just do this, and it just became what it is today. And it's just amazing to me the many tens of thousands of people who have tuned in over the years. I don't know how many. There's really no way to measure that. Not entirely, because we're on so many different platforms now and different things. But it's just fascinating to see what this has become without any kind of backing or big names behind us. We're just two guys talking. We're just sharing our hearts. I think, as I've said before, Joel, I think it's probably over a 20-year span one of the most consistent podcasts that you'll find when it comes to the gospel, the new covenant, the grace of God. And much of it is the exact opposite of what the majority of people believe inside of their church doctrines. Much of it is. But I just think that it's amazing that it's turned out the way that it has in helping so many people, and I don't know what the future will bring. We were on the brink of cutting the podcast off here in the next week or two because Joel and I had a disagreement. He thinks that he's behind the microphone. I say that he's in front of the microphone.
I might have said that.
So we
wrong.
were going to be like Paul and Barnabas and maybe just go our separate ways.
Well, hold on a second. Let me adjust my headset. Oh, that's right. I am in front of the microphone. Okay, you're right. We can continue on the podcast. I agree with you now. But going along with that thought is that the amazing thing is that we do agree on so much. I'm sure, like we've said this in the past, there might be some things that we disagree on. It'd be little minor things that aren't necessarily big, but overall, what has really blown me away and amazed me is it's as if, and there's not, but it's as if there's a script that was written that says that when when one of those guys, when either Mike or Joel starts having thoughts about something, the other guy, he's going to go along with it. But it's not that. It's that we start talking about things, realizations come to us both at the same time, or in relatively around the same time, and it's just, I don't know what the word is, uncanny how we've just grown together in a lot of
when
this.
you stop, Joel, when you stop and think about some of the things that we've grown in our understanding of in a better way that were maybe different 20 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, to back up what you're saying there, it is interesting how some of those things, as we've grown in our understanding of the gospel and grace and different things about the Bible, and there might be a shift in our understanding that was different than before. I do find it interesting that for the most part, by and large, you and I have come to many of the same conclusions, because there just seems to be a unity of spirit there that's kind of hard to understand, right?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, we recently got, and we've heard from people over the years. I just recently got a message. I don't remember where it was, but somebody is going back. They've gone back to the beginning. They're listening, and now they got to go through 1,000 podcasts if you want to get through the whole thing. But I think she said she's on number 57. But if a person would do that, over time, you will notice that shift. It's not huge. The core of the message is we still believe the same stuff about the grace of God, about the love of God. Overall, it's the same, but there are some little shifts in our mindset regarding certain things that a person will notice if you listen for a long time. And I think it's just wonderful how God has used both of us together through our conversations to come to some of these conclusions, and to be able to remain on the same page with so many things. And if it wasn't that, it would still be okay. We could still do this, and we could still talk through things and issues, and it would be great. But I think it's really neat how it's come to be like this.
Well, the apostles were the same way. These were men. I realize sometimes people get into the worship of some of these Bible characters, or even the Bible itself. But these were human beings who didn't know everything, and they were also growing in their understanding. Not everything. Even when they were walking around with Jesus, they didn't get a lot of what he was telling them.
Right. Yeah.
Even after the resurrection, the writings say that some still doubted.
Yeah.
With Jesus standing right in front of them. And so whether it's Paul, Peter, James, anybody that you want to look at in the Bible, even if you're just looking at the New Testament, there was changes going on for them as well. And I believe, of course, that Paul was also growing in his understanding of this gospel as time went along.
Yeah. Paul wasn't some superhuman who just all of a sudden understood everything immediately. Definitely, he, just like every one of us, he went through a period of growth in his understanding. And I think whenever he received the revelation from Jesus about the gospel, I'm sure that he drastically changed a lot of what he believed, but I think he also went through a period of years of transformation and of changing and growing in his understanding of the gospel as well. And so that should be encouragement for all of us too. As we kind of wrap up here with our celebration of 20 years of the Growing in Grace podcast and the 1,000th episode, I want to bring out some numbers here, but not for the sake of, because this has never been about how many people listen. This has never been about any of that. From day one, our heart and that's you and me, Cap, together. Our heart has been to encourage people, to proclaim the gospel, to share the gospel, to lift people up. It's the gospel that the message of the gospel, the truth that makes people free from the bondage. There is so much bondage out there, so much unnecessary bondage in the church, and the truth will help people to be free. And we have heard from so many people over the years where this message has resonated with them. Just since it's the beginning of the year here in 2025, just briefly, I don't know what to share here, but we got, so Spotify every year, they do a little thing, a wrapped thing. They give you all kinds of stats about what happened in the last year. I've also looked on YouTube and Apple Podcasts a little bit, and just in general, some of the numbers, well, let's see. I'm trying to find it here. That's why I'm okay. Growing in Grace, 2024 gains followers plus 35%. So 35% increase in followers on Spotify. Again, that has nothing to do with patting ourselves on the back, but just to show people are interested in this. People want to hear about this. And in fact, a 66% increase in new listeners. And so some of that could be somebody switched from one platform to another, to Spotify or vice versa. Sometimes that happens. But an increase in 66% of new listeners. And so this is after 20 years. Again, like you were saying before, no advertising, no big church or ministry backing us up. It's just you and me. And this type of stuff is happening. And so that's really cool. The top episode from last year, salvation as a gift, but what about sanctification? People wonder about this sanctification thing. The average rating on Spotify, 4.7. I think on Apple Podcasts is 4.9. And generally speaking, most people give a 5-star rating, but if they disagree with us about something, they're going to give a little bit of a lower star rating, and that's okay. We understand that. What else? Is there anything else?
Well, just a reminder that you can go to the archived page of growingingrace.org, and that's where all the podcasts are listed. Of course, as you said, Joel, a lot of people are getting on these platforms where they can access podcasts, which has become a big thing over the last 10 years or so. So we're really appreciative of that, because it's just one of those things where, why do we do what we do? It isn't obviously for income reasons or any of that, as we've mentioned, but it's just our heart to want to see people discover the love of God and the grace apart from works that came to us through the gift of his Son, Jesus Christ. He just loves you so much, and he's not angry with you. He's in love with you. He's passionate about you. And as we grow in our understanding of this message, it changes everything, and it brings a peace that truly does pass our understanding. It's hard to get with the mind. And that's why we're here doing what we do. And we look forward to continue doing it for, we don't know how long. We didn't know how long 20 years ago. We don't know how long today. But I know I'm looking forward to maybe cracking open some new eggs, Joel, because I think this message of the good news, it's even better than we think.
This has been Growing in Grace with Mike Kapler and Joel Brieseke, heard online through various internet sources around the world each week. Access past programs by visiting growingingrace.org. Share it with a friend and listen again next week for more Growing in Grace.